everyone. In this video, we are going to explain how to create Docker images for JasperReports Server. To build the JasperReports Server, we require two Docker images, that is Jasper Server Buildomatic and Jasper Server Web App. The Buildomatic image contains metadata and scripts to configure and load the repository database. Additionally, it can also be utilized for import and export resources in the future. On the other hand, the web app image includes the actual application, which is based on Tomcat base image. Throughout this video, we will cover various methods for creating Docker images. These are the methods include: first one, creating Docker images using Docker commands. Second one, creating Docker images using Docker Compose with Postgres deployed as a Docker container, which is the default option we are providing. And the third one, creating Docker images using Docker Compose with an external database. And fourth one, creating Docker images using Docker Compose along with external database and externalizing DB parameters. In this scenario, we will show how to externalize the DB parameters. At the end of this video, we also explain how to create images for Scalable query engine and how to integrate JasperReports Server with Scalable query engine. Let's see all these scenarios one by one in demo session. You will find each and every step clearly in GitHub under JS Docker repo, where we have all the documentation for how to deploy this JasperReports Server on Docker, KTS, and OpenShift. Now let's go for the Docker, how to create the images for this. For this, navigate to the path Jaspersoft containers, Docker, JRS. Here you will find the README section. These are the prerequisites. Then this is the installer setup. For this, create a directory first. I have created release-9.0.0 in my local. Then go to the next step. Clone the JS Docker repository into the current directory. Copy the command. Let's check it. Now you will see JS Docker. Go to the JS Docker. Here you will find Jaspersoft containers folder, which has all the necessary things, folders, structures. All the files to deploy Docker, KTS, and OpenShift. Let's go with the next step. The next step is download the commercial edition of JasperReports Server WAR file installer zip in the current directory. So I have already downloaded into my directory. You see in my directory release 9.0, both Jaspersoft containers and the bin zip both should be at the same level. The next step, go to the next step. Navigate to the path scripts and run the command unpack var installer. You see both the containers folder and the installer are in the same path. Then navigate to the scripts path, which is under Jaspersoft containers, Docker, JRS, and scripts. Then run the command. It will unzip the installer in the same path. For this, navigate to the folder release 9.0 and check. See, if you see, it zip file unzipped in the same folder. These are the environmental variables which you will see under .env file. Which is under Jaspersoft containers. Go to Docker, JRS, and you will find .env file here. This is .env file. By default, install Chromium is false. If you want to make use of it, make it as true. These are all the options. For Tomcat base image, we are providing right now two base images with JDK 11 and JDK 17. You can choose your one and update the file as you need it based on your requirement. And that's it about .env file. For building the images, we need to update two files, that is .env file and default master properties file. Just we saw .env file and what are the parameters in it. Now we'll see default master properties file, which is under Jaspersoft containers. Go to Docker, JRS, under JRS resources. Here you will find default properties. In default properties, we have default master properties file. This file contains the details of database that is used to set up repository. Update the DB host value with the repository host name. In my case, I am using Docker desktop, so using host.docker.internal as my DB host value. If you are using Docker Compose, use DB host equal to repository, or if your deployment is on K8s cluster, then use repository postgres default.sv.cluster.local, where your postgres is deployed on cluster and where here default is the namespace. Use your namespace. That's it. Here are all the options provided for DB host. That's it about default master properties file. After updating these two files .env and default master properties file, then pass the Docker commands to build the images. These are the two commands which will create both the images. First one, copy the command. Change the version number. It should be equal to the installer one that you downloaded. That's it. It will create the buildomatic image. Build is done. Let's copy the other command. Same. Change the version number. It should be equal to the installer one that you downloaded. This command is used to create the web app image. That's it. Build is done. Let's check the images. It created both the images, web app and buildomatic. The two commands should run in your directory path where you have both the container repo and the installer one. So I have passed the Docker commands in this path. That's it about the Docker commands. Let's see the second scenario. Creating the Docker images using Docker Compose with Postgres deployed in Docker, which is the default option. Let's see this one. To do this, I have deleted the images that were created now with Docker commands. The steps to follow for this are the same as Docker. Create the directory, cloning the repo, downloading the installer one in the same path, and running the unpack var installer, and updating the .env file and default master properties file as required. As we will see the default option, Postgres deployed as a Docker container, which we will see under Docker compose.aml file, which is under JRS. Here we'll see the repository. It will create the default repository Postgres. So update the host name in default master properties. Which is under resources, default properties, default master properties. Update the DB host with the repository host name. In my case, I am using Docker desktop. So using host.docker.internal as my DB host. I'm using the default options. So these are all the default options. Nothing change in it. This session will tell you how to create the Docker images with Docker Compose. Navigate to the path JRS and pass the command docker compose build. Navigate to the JRS path, which is under Jaspersoft containers, docker JRS, and pass the command docker compose build, which is simple. It will create both the images, web app and buildomatic in a single go. Build is done. Let's check the images. Here are the two images it created, web app and buildomatic. The thing to remember here is we should pass docker compose commands at JRS path only, because we have docker compose file at JRS path. If you see, docker compose file is at JRS path. So we should pass docker compose commands at JRS path only to create the images. That's it all about docker compose. Let's see the third scenario. Creating Docker images using Docker Compose with an external database. Just now we saw with the default database. We'll see now with external database. Let's see this one. If you want to use an external database, then update the DB details under default master properties. Your host name. This is my RTS host name, which is hosted on AWS. And then go to the Docker Compose file. Comment out the repository here. Depends on where we find in web app. Under web app, you will find this one. Under web app, depends on repository. Comment out this one. Because we are using the external repo, we no need to create the default one. So the same, comment out at buildomatic also. Comment out the repository, depends on. So we are using the external one, so we don't want the internal one to create one more. That's it all about. Then go to the command prompt. Same, navigate to the JRS path. and pass Docker Compose build. That's it. It will create both the images, web app and build. You can clearly see that while creating the image now, it has taken the external DB host value, which is hosted on AWS, that I passed to default master this file. If build is done, you can clearly see that now default host is DB host is the one which I passed through default pass properties file. Then let's check the images. Here are the two images created, Buildomatic and web app. The thing to remember here, we need to change the DB host under default master properties 1, and in the Docker Compose file, you need to comment out the repository. That's it. Because you are using the external DB, so we don't want to create internal repo, so we need to comment out that. That's it. Then we'll see the fourth scenario. Creating Docker images using Docker Compose along with an external database and externalizing the DB parameters. Here we will see how we can externalize the DB parameters. Let's see this one. Under Jasper Server customization folder, you can see the example for how can we externalize the parameters. Let us see one for the default master, for DB, how can we externalize the DB parameters. Let us see. For this, we need to go to the Jasper Server customization folder and have to create a folder structure like. You will find Jasper Server customization folder under Jaspersoft containers. Go to Docker. Under JRS, you'll find the resources folder. Go to init. Here we'll find Jasper Server customization folder. In it, create a folder web apps and create a folder Jasper Server Pro. In it, create meta inif. The folder structure should be like this: web apps, Jasper Server Pro, meta inif, and copy the context.xml under meta inif. The file looks like this. It contains all the DB details: DB username, DB password, DB host, port, DB name. It will get details from default first properties file. We need to update three files: .env file and default master property file and Docker Compose file. Let us see them one by one. First, go to the default master properties file. Update the DB details under default master properties as shown here. Now it will take the DB details from .env file. So then move to the .env file, which is under JRS. Add the DB details here. This is my repository host name, which is hosted on AWS. These are my DB details. Then move to the Docker Compose file. Pass the DB details under Java ops as an arguments, which is under environmental tag. Pass all the DB details which you passed in .env file as arguments here: DB host, DB password, DB username, DB name, and DB port. all the things that you passed through .env file pass as arguments under Java ops as shown. Then comment out the repository under depends on and in web apps and in buildmatics because it will create the internal repo. We already using the external one, so we don't want to create it. So comment out both at buildmatic and at Jasper server, both at web app and buildmatic. Comment out the repository one. That's it. Then navigate to the JRS path on your command prompt. Pass the command docker compose build, which will create both the images, web app and buildmatic. Now you can clearly see that the DB details it is taken from .env file. Let's check the images. Sorry. Here are the two images it created, Jasper server, buildmatic and web app. Now let's see how to build the scalable query images. If you want to integrate Jasper server with Scalable, before building these web app and buildmatic images, you need to set Scalable as true in .env file. By default, it is false. If you want to integrate JRS with Scalable, then make it as true before building the images. Then navigate to the Scalable path, which is under Docker. Then pass the command docker compose build, which will create two images, Scalable Query Engine and Scalable Query Engine drivers. Build is done. Let's check the images. Here are the two images it created now, Scalable Query Engine and the driver one. That's it, all about creating the Docker images. Thank you for watching this video.